Amelia Bedelia Goes Camping by Peggy Parrish. Hurry up, Amelia Bedelia, called Mr. Rogers. I'm coming, said Amelia Bedelia. Did we get everything? Asked Mr. Rogers. I would say so, said Amelia Bedelia. Good, said Mr. Rogers. It's time to hit the road. Hit the road? Asked Amelia Bedelia. All right. And she picked up a stick and Amelia Bedelia hit the road. Stop that, shouted Mr. Rogers. Get into the car. Amelia Bedelia got into the car. I'm so excited, she said. I've never been camping before. You will have fun, said Mrs. Rogers. They rode for a long time. Finally, Mr. Rogers stopped the car. Wake up, Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Rogers. This is it. Amelia Bedelia looked up and all around. But where is camp, she asked. The camp is in the car, said Mr. Rogers. In the car, said Amelia Bedelia. We're going to camp in the car? The things we need to make camp are in the car, said Mr. Rogers. Make the camp, said Amelia Bedelia. We have to make the camp? Just forget it, said Mr. Rogers. I'll put the tent here. We can pitch it later. All right, said Amelia Bedelia. Now let's have some fun, said Mr. Rogers. Let's catch some fish. I've never caught a fish, said Amelia Bedelia. Is it like catching a ball? Mr. Rogers laughed. It's more fun, he said. I'll show you how. Did you bring any cookies? Asked Mrs. Rogers. Yes, said Amelia Bedelia. I made up a new kind. Amelia Bedelia got the cookies. Chocolate, said Mr. Rogers. My favorite. He took a bite. They're so crunchy, he said. That's the potato chips, said Amelia Bedelia. I do love potato chips. I put in a whole bag. I call them chocolate chip cookies. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers looked at each other. Call them what you like, said Mrs. Rogers. Just make them more often. Bring them along and follow me, said Mr. Rogers. Let's find a good fishing spot. They walked along the bank. After a bit, Mr. Rogers stopped. He looked at the water. This looks good, he said. Amelia Bedelia stopped. I see one. I see a fish, she said. I'll catch it. Wait, said Mr. Rogers. But Mr. Rogers was too late. Amelia Bedelia was in the water. Here, fishy, fishy, she called. She grabbed the fish. I caught it, she yelled. What a big one, said Mrs. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia looked at the fish. The fish looked at Amelia Bedelia. All right, said Amelia Bedelia. Away you go. The fish swam away. Amelia Bedelia, yelled Mr. Rogers. Why did you do that? Amelia Bedelia looked surprised. Why not, she said. You just said to catch a fish. I did that. Oh, go away, said Mr. Rogers. Thank you, said Amelia Bedelia. I'm wet. I need to change. Amelia Bedelia started to leave. Oh, Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Rogers. Please start a fire in the grill. Use pine cones to start it, said Mr. Rogers. And put on some coffee. All right, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia walked to the car. She changed into dry clothes. Now, said Amelia Bedelia, I'll surprise Mr. Rogers. I'll pitch that tent. She walked over to the tent. Shoot, said Amelia Bedelia. I can't even lift it. Need some help? Said someone. Amelia Bedelia turned around. Who are you? She asked. I'm Harry, said one boy. I'm Mike, said the other. I'm Amelia Bedelia, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia, said Harry. We've heard about you. You have? Said Amelia Bedelia. That's nice. Now will you help me pitch this tent? Where do you want to pitch it? Asked Mike. The big thing is to pitch it, said Amelia Bedelia. It can come down where it wants. The boys grinned at each other. Okay, let's do it, said Harry. They all caught hold of the tent and they pitched it. And they pitched that tent. Hooray, said Amelia Bedelia. We did it. Maybe we should pitch it again, said Mike. Why, said Amelia Bedelia. It's in the bushes, said Harry. That's a good place for it, said Amelia Bedelia. It's out of my way. Hey, said Mike. Mom is calling us. Thank you for helping me, said Amelia Bedelia. She watched the boys go. I'd better get that fire started, said Amelia Bedelia. She got some wood and some pine cones and she put them in the grill. Live and learn, said Amelia Bedelia. I didn't know pine cones could start a fire. I want to see this. Amelia Bedelia sat down. She waited and waited, but the fire didn't start. Suddenly she jumped up. The coffee, she said. I forgot to put on the coffee. She poured coffee on the pine cones. Now it should start, she said. Oh, go jump in the lake, said Mr. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia stumped her foot. I will not, she said. I don't have any more dry clothes. Mr. Rogers laughed. You win, he said. Can you row a boat? Certainly, said Amelia Bedelia. Use any of the boats, said Mr. Rogers. Have fun. Amelia Bedelia found the boats. I'll just use all of them, she said. She pushes the boats this way and that. The boats were rowed. Amelia Bedelia went back. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers. That was fun, she said. What's next? I need the tent stakes, said Mr. Rogers. I'll go get them, said Amelia Bedelia. She ran to the car. She brought back a package. Here, she said. Mr. Rogers opened the package. What in tarnation? Tarnation, he said. Didn't I cut them right? Asked Amelia Bedelia. They look just like tents. How am I going to pitch the tent? Asked Mr. Rogers. Don't fret, said Amelia Bedelia. I pitched the tent. Mr. Rogers looked. Where is the tent? He asked. In the bushes, said Amelia Bedelia. Just where it landed. What is it? Shouted Mr. Rogers. He stomped off. Mrs. Rogers went after him. Why is he so upset? Asked Amelia Bedelia. I was just trying to help him. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers came back. It's all right, Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Rogers. We can sleep under the stars. Help me get the sleeping bag, said Mrs. Rogers. I can do it, said Amelia Bedelia. She went to the car. Amelia Bedelia came back slowly. Shh, she whispered. I think they're sleeping. But how can you tell? Mr. and Mrs. Rogers stared at Amelia Bedelia. Then Mrs. Rogers said, Never mind, Amelia Bedelia. I'll get this camp ship shape, said Mr. Rogers. That sounds like fun, said Amelia Bedelia. What kind? Amelia Bedelia bustled around. She did this and that. Finally, she had everything ready. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers, called Amelia Bedelia. It's time to eat. I'm sure ready, said Mrs. Rogers. She and Mr. Rogers came out. Fried chicken, stuffed eggs, said Mr. Rogers. What a feast! All three ate and ate. Now I'm stuffed, said Mr. Rogers. There's one more thing, said Amelia Bedelia. I'll go get it. And soon she came back singing, Happy birthday to you. My birthday, said Mr. Rogers. I forgot my birthday. Throw out the candles, said Mrs. Rogers, and cut the cake. Mr. Rogers did just that, and then he said, Amelia Bedelia, this is the best camping trip ever. Amelia Bedelia smiled. Let's do it again, she said. I do love camping.